I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your thoughts move at their own pace. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where memories return, not urgently, but patiently, where understanding settles in quietly without needing words. Later in life, the mind doesn't race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it connects dots that once seemed unrelated, and it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that don't surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you're alone with yourself, resting, remembering, and gently making sense of a long lived-in life. Tonight, your mind is going to travel, not forward, not into worry or planning or the business of tomorrow, but backward, across centuries, across oceans, across a distance so vast in time that the world you're about to visit seems almost like a dream. And yet it was real. Every bit of it was real. The soil was real. The roots growing in the dark earth were real. The sound that carried across the valleys in the early morning was real. The people who lived this life were real, and they were extraordinary in ways that no history book has ever quite done justice to. So take a slow breath. Let your body soften into the bed. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands open, and allow this night to meet you where you are. Before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out. Let's begin. Close your eyes and imagine an island. Not a small island. A long, narrow island shaped like a spine, like something ancient and alive stretching itself out in the warm waters of the South Pacific. Rugged mountains running down its center like a raised ridge of bones. Valleys dropping away on either side, green and layered and breathing. The ocean surrounding everything, blue-green and enormous, stretching in every direction until it meets the sky. This is New Caledonia, and you are here, not in the present, not in the modern world, with its roads and cities and noise. You are here 3,000 years ago, or 2,000, or 1,000. The island looks different, and it looks the same. The mountains are the same. The seasons are the same. The earth beneath your feet is the same red-orange laterite soil that will still be here long after every human structure has returned to dust. You are standing at the edge of a garden, but calling it a garden feels too simple, too small a word for what stretches before you, because this is not a garden the way you've ever understood a garden. This is a cultivated landscape that took generations to build. Terraces cut into hillsides by hand, stone by stone, year by year, shaped by people who understood that the earth needs to be worked with patience, not forced. Irrigation channels carved with extraordinary precision, moving water from higher ground down through the terraces in a slow, deliberate flow that keeps the soil moist through the harshest months of the dry season. And growing in this soil, tucked beneath the surface, hidden from view, growing in the dark the way all the most important things grow, are the yams. You breathe slowly. The air here is warm and dense with the smell of vegetation, of turned earth, of something green and vital that you can't quite name but recognize immediately as the smell of growth, of life doing what life does when it's left to do it properly, when it's tended with care and knowledge and deep respect. The yam cultivators of New Caledonia were not simple farmers. They were not people scratching at the earth, hoping for the best. They were sophisticated agricultural engineers, ecological managers, social architects who had built an entire civilization around the knowledge of how to grow, store, exchange, and ceremonially honor one root vegetable that fed not just their bodies, but their entire social and spiritual world. You think about that for a moment. One plant, one root growing in the dark earth. And from that root, an entire way of life. You lie here under your blankets in the quiet of tonight, and you feel something loosen in your chest. Because there's something about simplicity like that which reaches across all the centuries and all the distance and touches something true. The idea that meaning doesn't require complexity, that a life built around something simple and real and necessary can be rich beyond measuring. Let that settle over you like warmth. The island they called home was geologically young in the way that Pacific islands are young, volcanic in origin, still expressing itself through dramatic landscapes. The soil in different parts of the island behaved differently. Some valleys were fertile and generous, others were thin and difficult. The yam cultivators knew every variation. They had learned the land the way you learn a person you've loved for a very long time, not from books, not from theory, but from presence, from showing up every season, in every kind of weather, paying attention. They grew multiple varieties of yam. Not just one, many, each variety with its own personality, its own preferences, its own relationship with the soil and the season. Some varieties grew quickly and were harvested early. Others grew slowly, taking their time underground, developing a density and size that made them valuable for ceremony, for exchange, for the particular moments in the social calendar when what you brought to the gathering mattered, not just as food, but as statement. You've known things like that in your own life. The moments when what you brought to a situation carried weight beyond its practical function. When the gesture was the meaning. When showing up with the right thing at the right time communicated something words couldn't. The yam cultivators understood this completely. They had built a language around it. The dry season determined everything. In New Caledonia, the climate divides the year into wet and dry with a clarity that shapes all human activity around it. The wet season brings rain and warmth and growth. The dry season brings the trade winds from the southeast, cooler and drier, pulling moisture from the air, stressing plants that aren't adapted to its particular demands. Most crops struggle or fail in the dry season, but the yam, with its deep root system and its ability to store water in its tubers, manages. The yam cultivators had learned to plant at precisely the right moment before the dry season began, timing the growth so that the yams were developing underground during the dry months, out of the heat, protected by the earth itself, drawing on stored moisture while the surface world turned brown and dry above them. This was not guesswork. This was accumulated knowledge, passed from parent to child, from elder to apprentice, refined over hundreds of years of careful observation. They knew the stars that marked the right planting time. They knew the winds that signaled the seasons were shifting. They read the land the way you might read a face you know well, every small sign carrying information for those trained to see it. You feel your breathing slow. You feel the weight of the blankets around you, that particular comfort of being covered, of being held gently by something warm. And you imagine what it would have been like to understand time the way those cultivators understood it. Not as a straight line moving forward, but as a cycle, a turning, a return. The dry season does not mean the end of things. It means the hidden time, the time of underground growing, the time of patience, the time when what matters is happening where you cannot see it, below the surface, in the dark. There's something in that for you tonight, something worth sitting with. The periods of your life that felt dry, that felt like nothing was happening, that felt like waiting without purpose. How many of those were actually periods of underground growing? How many of those quiet, difficult seasons were the times when something important was forming in the dark, preparing to emerge when the right moment came? The yam cultivators built their villages on the higher ground, above the garden terraces, where the air moved more freely and the view was wide. The huts were round, built on raised platforms with conical roofs that rose to impressive heights, designed to allow heat to rise and escape while keeping the living space below cool and shaded. The construction of these huts was itself a community act. Not one family working alone, but many families working together, sharing labor, sharing knowledge, sharing the particular satisfaction of building something that would last. But there was one hut that stood apart from the others, one structure that was not for ordinary sleeping or ordinary living, the chief's hut. You close your eyes more completely. You let your thoughts drift toward it. The chiefly hut in a new Caledonian village was not simply the biggest building. It was the center of everything. It was the place where the social world organized itself, where decisions were made about the planting calendar, about the distribution of the harvest, about which families would exchange yams with which other families during the ceremonies that marked the turning of the seasons. It was the place where disputes were resolved, where alliances were formed, where the community's relationship with its ancestors was maintained through ritual and memory. The chief himself was not a ruler in the way that word often implies. He was not a king commanding obedience through force. He was something more subtle and more complex. He was a custodian, a holder of responsibility, a person whose authority came from his relationship with the land, with the ancestors who had cultivated it before him, and with the community's trust that he understood and honored both. The chiefly hut was built larger and taller than the family huts surrounding it, its entrance carefully oriented, its interior organized according to principles that encoded the social hierarchy of the community. The central post of the hut was the most important structural element, and it was treated with reverence that went beyond its physical function. It was not just a post holding up a roof. It was a connection between the earth and the sky, between the ancestors below and the living above, between the past and the continuing present. You think about the structures in your own life that have served that kind of double function. Things that appeared to be practical but were also symbolic. Objects and places that held meaning beyond their physical form. The table where your family gathered. The chair that belonged to someone who is gone. The photograph that was never quite straight on the wall, but that you never moved because moving it felt wrong somehow. The chiefly hut held the community's memory. And the community's memory was the community's future. When the chief received guests, when neighboring villages arrived for exchange ceremonies, they entered through a particular path that was lined with plants carrying social meaning, and they were received in a particular way that announced their status and the nature of the relationship between the two communities. Nothing was accidental. Every element of the encounter had been refined over generations into a form that communicated what words alone could not carry. The yams that would be exchanged during these ceremonies had been selected months in advance. The best ones, the largest ones grown for precisely this purpose, not for eating, but for giving. And giving them meant something. Giving a large, well-grown yam to a neighboring chief was an act of respect, of connection, of acknowledgement that the relationship between these two communities was healthy and honored. What you gave declared who you were. You breathe slowly. You feel your body settling more deeply into the mattress. The blankets around you are warm and exactly right. The room is quiet. The night is doing what nights do, moving gently forward in the dark. Now imagine the morning of a ceremony. The dry season is nearing its end. The rains are coming. The yams planted months ago are ready to be harvested. And before the harvest begins, before a single tuber is lifted from the earth, there is a sound that carries across the valley, that rises from the village on the hill, that echoes against the mountain slopes and comes back changed, deepened, made resonant by the landscape itself. The conch shell trumpet. You've perhaps heard a conch shell blown before, in some other context, in some other life, but you've never heard it the way it sounds here, in this valley, in this morning, in this particular moment of transition between seasons. The person blowing it has spent years learning to shape the sound with their lips and breath. The shell itself was selected carefully, its natural opening enlarged with skill and patience, its tone tested and known. It is not just an instrument, it is an announcement. It is a voice that speaks on behalf of the community, to the land, to the ancestors, to the neighboring villages across the hills who will hear it and know what it means. The harvest is beginning. The season is turning. Come, be present. This moment matters. You lie here and you listen to that sound in your imagination. You let it fill whatever space exists in your mind between waking and sleeping. That low, resonant call, ancient and immediate at once, carrying meaning across distance, across time, all the way to you in this bed, in this room, in this night that is yours alone. The conch shell trumpet was used at specific moments in the ceremonial calendar, not casually, not for everyday communication. It was reserved for the significant thresholds, the beginning of the planting season, the beginning of the harvest, the arrival of important guests, the death of a chief, the installation of a new one, the moments when the community needed to gather itself to acknowledge that something important was happening, to mark the threshold between what had been and what was beginning. Every community has its version of the conch shell, its way of marking the moments that matter, its signal that something real is happening and everyone should pay attention. You've heard your own conch shells over the years, the phone call that changed everything, the morning you woke up and something was different, even before you understood why. The moment at a table or in a car or in a garden when words were spoken that divided your life into before and after. The conch shell says, this moment is a threshold. Cross it with awareness. Cross it with presence. Don't let it pass without knowing what it is. The cultivators listened to the conch shell, and they moved, they gathered, they made their way from their huts down the paths between the terraces, following routes worn smooth by generations of feet, making the same journey in the same season year after year. They carried tools. They carried baskets woven specifically for the harvest. They carried the knowledge of what they were doing and why, the deep muscle memory of people whose relationship with this work went back further than any living person could remember, and they began to dig, carefully, with attention. Because the yam is a root that can be damaged by careless harvesting. The whole point is to bring it out of the earth intact, whole, unmarked. The skill of harvesting is as important as the skill of planting. You give as much attention to the ending as you gave to the beginning. Your own eyes grow heavy. Your own breathing deepens. The weight of the blankets is exactly right. The room is perfectly quiet. And somewhere across 3,000 years of distance, the sound of the conch shell is still resonating, still carrying its message forward through time, still arriving in this moment, in this bed, in this night. Rest now. The first half of this journey is complete. The valley is quiet. The yams are in the ground. The dry season is holding everything in patient stillness. And you are lying here, exactly where you should be, exactly as you are, held by the night the same way the earth holds the root, in the dark, in the warm, in the patient, necessary quiet that makes all growing possible. The second half of the journey waits for you, but not yet. For now, simply breathe, simply rest, simply let the sound of that ancient shell echo softly through your dreams. You are still here, still in the valley, still in the warm dark of this Pacific night that exists somewhere between the world you know and the world you've been visiting. The conch shell has sounded, the people have gathered, the harvest has begun, and you are lying here, breathing slowly, held by your blankets, present in two places at once, the way the mind is capable of being when the body is finally, fully at rest. Let yourself stay here a little longer. There is more to witness, more to understand, more that this ancient island has to offer the part of you that is listening in the quiet. The harvest is not a rushed thing. You need to understand that. In a world that measures productivity in units per hour, in output and efficiency and speed, the yam harvest of the new Caledonian cultivators was something else entirely. It was deliberate. It was ceremonial in its pace, even when ceremony wasn't formally being performed. Every person who moved through those terraces in the days of the harvest moved with a quality of attention that we might struggle to recognize today, because we've largely forgotten what it looks like to do something with that level of care. Each yam was unearthed by hand. The soil was loosened carefully around it before it was lifted. The vine that had connected it to the surface world was noted, observed, sometimes kept as a marker for the following season. The tuber itself was inspected, its size and shape and condition registered in the mind of the person holding it. And then it was placed, not thrown, not dropped, but placed into the basket or onto the prepared ground beside the taro. This was not merely practical caution. This was respect. The yam was not simply a food source to be extracted as efficiently as possible. It was the product of a relationship between the cultivator and the soil, between the community and the land, between the living and the ancestors who had cultivated this same ground before them. You do not treat a relationship carelessly. You honor it in the way you handle what it produces. You feel something shift in your body as you absorb this. Some small tightening that you hadn't noticed loosens, because there's something deeply restful about the idea of doing things carefully, of moving through tasks with attention rather than urgency, of treating the ordinary moments of work and care as worthy of your full presence. You've done that in your own life. There have been times when you moved through something slowly and deliberately, and you knew while you were doing it that the slowness was the point, that the attention itself was the meaning, that rushing through it would have cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. The cultivators knew this every day. It was not a special insight reserved for philosophers or elders. It was simply how work was done, slowly, carefully, with full awareness of what the work meant and who it was for. The yams came out of the earth in varying sizes. The smaller ones, the younger ones, were set aside for eating in the days immediately following the harvest. They would be prepared simply, roasted in fire or baked in earth ovens, shared among the families who had worked that day. These were the everyday yams, nourishing and good, but not extraordinary. The extraordinary ones were different. The large ones, the ones that had been planted in the richest sections of the terrace, tended with extra care, staked carefully so their vines reached maximum sun during the wet season months. These were the ceremony yams, and they were not eaten, not immediately, not casually. They were stored. The storage of the yams was an entire science in itself. Yams, properly stored in cool, shaded, well-ventilated conditions, can last for months. The cultivators had built storage structures specifically for this purpose, structures that maintained the right temperature and airflow to keep the tubers viable through the months between harvest and ceremony. This required knowledge, knowing which yams would store well and which wouldn't, knowing how to arrange them so that one rotting tuber didn't compromise the others, knowing how to check them regularly without disturbing them unnecessarily. This knowledge was not written down. There were no books, no manuals, no recorded instructions. This knowledge lived in people, in the minds and hands and habits of the cultivators themselves. It was transmitted through proximity, through watching, through doing alongside someone who already knew, through the patient, repeated experience of seasons turning and yams going into storage and yams coming out of storage, some perfectly preserved and some lost, and learning from both outcomes. You think about the knowledge that lives in you the same way, not the knowledge you learned from books or formal instruction, though that is real and valuable too. But the other kind, the knowledge that arrived through doing, through being present while something was happening and absorbing it, without fully realizing you were absorbing it. The knowledge that only revealed itself when you needed it, and it was simply there, available, reliable, already part of you. That knowledge came from people, from the ones who let you watch, who let you be nearby while they worked, who didn't rush you away or protect you from the complexity of what they were doing, who trusted that if you were present long enough, you would learn without needing to be formally taught. The yam cultivators built their children into the work early, not as burden, not as cheap labor, but as apprentices in the oldest sense. The children were there. They watched. They carried small loads. They asked questions that were answered seriously, not dismissed. They were treated as future custodians of knowledge that would only exist if it was passed on correctly. And so the knowledge continued. Season after season, generation after generation. The same terraces worked by the same families, the same irrigation channels maintained by the same hands that had learned the work from the hands before them. The continuity was not accidental. It was actively maintained. It was understood as one of the most important responsibilities the community carried. You breathe, slowly. The night has deepened around you. The room is very quiet. Your body is relaxed in a way that is different from the forced relaxation of trying to sleep. This is the relaxation of actually having let go, of having released the day and the worry and the planning and the noise, of being here, now, in this bed, in this night, following the thread of this ancient story through the dark. The ceremonial season, when it came, transformed the village entirely. The dry season was not only a time of planting and patient waiting. It was a time of preparation for the ceremonies that would mark the harvest's arrival and the new wet season's beginning. And that preparation involved the entire community in ways that went far beyond agriculture. Women wove the ceremonial baskets that would carry the exchange yams. These were not ordinary baskets. They were works of considerable skill, their patterns carrying encoded meaning, their construction requiring hours of careful, precise work. Different patterns meant different things. A basket given to a neighboring chief carried information in its weaving about the relationship between the two communities, about the history of exchange between them, about the respect being offered in this particular gift. The women who made these baskets were not performing a secondary or domestic task. They were participating in the social architecture of the community, just as directly as the men who dug the terraces and tended the vines. The basket and the yam it carried were inseparable. You could not give one without the other. The container and the content together formed the complete message. You lie here and you think about the containers in your own life, the forms that shape the content, the way something was said being as important as what was said. The envelope that suggested the letter inside would matter. The table set with care before anyone sat down to eat. The way the light was in a room when someone told you something that changed you. Form is never just form. Form carries meaning. The cultivators knew this in their bones. The men, in the weeks before the ceremony, attended to the chiefly hut. The path leading to its entrance was cleared and maintained. The exterior of the structure was inspected for any weathering or damage from the dry season winds. If repairs were needed, they were made communally, with the same careful attention that had characterized the original construction. The hut needed to be ready, not merely functional, but presentable, dignified, worthy of the exchanges that would take place within and around it. Inside, the chief prepared himself and his words, because the ceremony was also a performance of language, not performance in the hollow sense, not theatre for its own sake, but the understanding that certain moments require a quality of speech that ordinary conversation cannot provide. The chief's words during the ceremony carried the weight of community history, of ancestral authority, of the obligations that bound neighboring clans to each other across the hills and valleys of this island. He did not improvise these words. They were not spontaneous. They emerged from a tradition of oratory that was itself a cultivated thing, a skill grown carefully over many years of listening and learning and being present when the elders spoke before him. He had memorized forms. He had internalized the proper ways of beginning and ending formal speech. He had practiced the particular cadences that signaled to his listeners that what was being said was important, binding, worth remembering. Words in that world were not cheap. They were not disposable. They were not produced in the thousands and scattered carelessly the way words are today. They were chosen, weighed, offered deliberately. And because they were offered deliberately, they were received deliberately. People listened the way we rarely listen anymore, with their whole attention, with full understanding that what was being said would not be repeated and needed to be held. You've been in rooms like that, maybe not many, but some. Rooms where someone spoke and everyone present knew that what was happening mattered and needed to be received fully. A eulogy that silenced an entire gathering, a declaration that altered the future of everyone listening, a confession that cost the speaker everything they had. You remember how it felt to really listen in those moments, how it required something of you, how you rose to meet it without being asked, how you were different, briefly, for the quality of attention you brought. The conch shell sounded again on the morning of the ceremony, this time not to announce the beginning of the harvest, but to announce the gathering of the clans. From neighboring villages, people were already moving. Along the paths between the terraces, through the sections of secondary forest that divided one community's land from another's, down into the valley and up the other side, following routes that had been walked for centuries before them. They brought their exchange yams carried in the ceremonial baskets. They brought their finest decorated objects. They brought themselves dressed for the occasion, marked with the things that announced their clan identity and their social position. And they came to the chiefly hut. They came to the center. They came to the place where the community's memory lived. The exchange itself was not a market, not a transaction in the commercial sense. It was closer to something you might call a renewal. Each gift of yams from one community to another renewed the bond between them. It said, we remember the relationship. We honor it. We bring it forward into this new season. We are still the people who are connected to you, who depend on you, who trust you. And the receiving community accepted the gift with corresponding weight. They honored it. They displayed it. They reciprocated with their own offering. The exchange moved back and forth, deepening with each pass, a kind of conversation conducted in yams and baskets and the careful language of ceremony. This is how alliances were maintained across generations, not through written treaties, not through formal legal structures, through the repeated, season-by-season, harvest-by-harvest practice of showing up and giving and receiving and renewing. The relationship was the ceremony, and the ceremony was the relationship, and neither existed without the other. You feel your own breath moving slowly through you, in and out. The most fundamental rhythm, the one that continues regardless of season, regardless of ceremony, regardless of whether you're paying attention to it or not. Your body breathing in the dark the same way the earth breathes through its seasons, taking in, giving out, in the endless exchange that makes life possible. The days following the ceremony were different in quality from the days preceding it. Something had been released. A held breath, collectively, finally exhaled. The tension of the dry season, the waiting, the patience required to tend something invisible underground and trust that it was growing. The tension had found its resolution. The yams were out. The rains were coming. The exchange had been made. The bonds had been renewed. The community had gathered and performed its own identity to itself and to its neighbors, and then everyone had been seen and recognized and affirmed. There is something about being seen and recognized that no amount of solitude can replace. You know this. You've lived alone at times, or felt alone at times, and you understand the particular hunger that comes from going too long without being genuinely seen, not glanced at, not catalogued, not processed through someone's expectations, but truly seen, known, recognized as the particular, specific, irreplaceable person you actually are. The ceremony gave the cultivators this, repeatedly, seasonally, built into the structure of the year itself. You will not go more than one cycle without gathering with your people and being known among them. This was not left to chance or to individual initiative. It was woven into the calendar the way the planting was woven into the calendar, as necessary and as regular. What would it mean to build that into your own life with the same deliberateness? Not waiting for it to happen, not hoping for it, but planning for it the way the cultivators plan their planting, knowing that the season for gathering comes and choosing to be ready for it. You are growing heavier now. The night is deeper. The part of your mind that generates language and analysis is beginning to soften its grip. What remains is quieter, warmer, more like feeling than thought. Let it be that, because there is one more thing to carry with you into sleep, one more image from this island, this civilization, this extraordinary experiment in living that lasted nearly 3,000 years on a narrow strip of Pacific land. The chiefs grew old. They always did. And when a chief grew old, the question of what came next was not left unaddressed until crisis forced it. The transition was prepared for. The young man who would carry the responsibility was identified and watched, and gradually, over years, brought into the circle of knowledge he would need. He sat with the old chief. He listened to the formal speeches. He was taken to the edges of the territory and shown its boundaries and told their histories. He was introduced to the neighboring chiefs and their families. He was woven into the relationships that he would someday be responsible for maintaining. When the old chief finally crossed the threshold that no one can avoid, the conch shell sounded in a different register, a different rhythm. The community gathered not to exchange yams, but to mourn and to remember and to formally release the person they had depended on. This mourning was taken seriously. It was given the time it required. No one rushed back to ordinary life before the grief had been honored. The grief was part of the ceremony. The ceremony was part of the grief. They were not separable. And then, when the morning had run its proper course, the conch shell sounded again, with the rhythm of beginning, of installation, of a new center taking its place in the chiefly hut. The community gathered again around its renewed center. The cycle continued. This too is something you carry. The understanding that endings and beginnings are not opposites, but partners. That mourning and renewal are not sequential emotions, but simultaneous ones. That you can grieve something truly while also, in the same breath, moving forward into what comes next. The cultivators did not pretend the loss wasn't real. They also did not let it stop the cycle. The yams still needed planting. The rains still came. The conch still needed to sound at the right moment. You've done this. You've buried people you loved, and then, in what felt like the very same moment, made someone dinner, attended to something ordinary, breathed in and breathed out. Not because the grief wasn't real, because life continues and you continue with it, carrying the loss alongside the living, letting both be true at once. The cultivators would have understood you completely. Across 3,000 years of distance, they would have looked at you, moving through your life with its layered losses and its stubborn continuities, and they would have recognized you as someone who knows what it means to tend something through a long, dry season, to trust the dark, to wait for the rain without losing faith that it will come. Because you do know this. You've lived through enough dry seasons to know that they end, that the underground growing is real even when you can't see it, that the conch shell will sound again, that the gathering will come, that the exchange will renew what time and distance have allowed to thin. You know this the way the cultivators knew the stars that marked the planting time, not from being told, from living through it, from surviving your own dry seasons and finding yourself improbably still here, still breathing, still capable of lying in a warm bed in the quiet dark and letting an ancient story find its way to the part of you that most needs to hear it. The island is quiet now. The ceremony is done. The exchange yams have been given and received. The chief is in his hut, the central post rising above him toward the conical roof, connecting earth to sky the way it has always connected them. The village around him is settling into sleep, one hut at a time, the fires dying down to coals, the sounds of the night coming back as the human sounds fade. The conch shell hangs silent on its peg. Its work is done for this season. It will sound again. When the next threshold arrives, when the next moment of gathering is needed, it will be taken down and pressed to ready lips, and its ancient voice will cross the valley once more, calling everyone home. But not tonight. Tonight the valley breathes. The terraces hold the dark earth in their careful geometry. The irrigation channels run their quiet, patient water down from the higher ground. The yam stores hold their precious cargo in cool shadow, and the stars that the cultivators watched for the signal to plant are out in their full Pacific brightness, indifferent and magnificent and constant. The same stars that are above you tonight, the same sky, the same darkness. 3,000 years of human life between that island and this bed, and the night is still the night, and rest is still rest, and the underground growing is still happening in every direction, in every life, in every season, that dares to be patient enough to trust the dark. You are part of this. You have always been part of this. The long human story of planting in faith and waiting in patience and gathering when the season turns. You are one cultivator among countless millions who have done this work in every form it takes, who have tended their relationships and their responsibilities and their griefs and their hopes with the same careful attention those Pacific Islanders gave their yams. It is enough, more than enough. It is everything. Let your eyes be closed now. Let your breath be slow and even. Let the warmth of the blankets be the warmth of soil around a root in the good dark of growing. Let this night be your underground season, your time of invisible development, your rest between the planting and the harvest. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to understand anything. You don't have to be anywhere other than exactly where you are. The valley is quiet. The hut is still. The conch shell rests, and you rest with it. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away, like embers on the wind. Good night. You've journeyed far through time tonight. Now it's time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes, breathe, and let sleep find you.